Good morning, everybody. It's 5 a.m. Central Standard Time here in central Oklahoma, having my morning cup of coffee. It's a nice coffee brand coffee, dark roast that I'm having in my Mystic Monk coffee cup here. Got a few people tuning in, which is good news for us. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the uh, the the Rome Life Forum. We're going to do this live today, as for those of you who have tuned in. Bishop Strickland spoke at this forum, and I'll have a bit of a cautiously optimistic good news to follow that as well at the end. So today we will be covering what Bishop Strickland said, because he threw a gauntlet down basically at when he was in Rome, because he traveled from the United States to Rome as a surprise speaker. Well, surprise until the last minute when LifeSite announced it on their website. He gave an address on October 31st. Good morning to you, digital man in Portugal, about 6-7 hours ahead of me, I think. And good morning to you in Nebraska. The chat is starting to fill up. We've got around 40 people watching right now, close to 50 at this point. So let's dive into our story today, because you know how I like to do things. We're not doing super long live streams here. So Bishop Strickland spoke at the Rome Life Forum on the 31st of October. He was part of a panel that included Cardinal Mueller and several others. I may cover what Cardinal Mueller said later in the week. If the news week is a little slow, we shall see. But here's how LifeSite ran the story. So they gave us this headline: Bishop Strickland, we must follow the example of the saints and martyrs in defense of the faith. Bishop Strickland recalled the example of St. John Fisher, who gave up his life against the heretical claim of Henry VIII to be the head of the church in England. So what he does here is he calls out the lukewarm for not resisting the heretics with enough force, for reminding us the price that our forebears in the faith paid so that we could have the Catholic faith, so that souls would have an opportunity to not fall into error. And that's our responsibility, to pull people out of error. And especially when it's prelates of the church who are defying the faith, it is our duty to stand up and say, no, this is the faith. This is what the faith has taught, and these novelties go against the faith. Chesty Marine says, good morning from Oklahoma. Well, good morning to you in central Oklahoma. I'm in Shawnee. I don't know where you are, but I'm here located in Shawnee. So howdy, neighbor. A lot of people saying they're praying for Bishop Strickland, another neighbor in the Ozarks of Missouri. Hello. Philippines and Germany checking in. Another Okie here. Very good. Hello to you in Australia, Canada, Phoenix, and anybody else checking in. Again, Bishop Strickland was addressing the Rome Life Forum and reminding us that a lot of people paid the ultimate price to defend the faith, to stand up for the faith. And if we don't have a similar level of courage that they did, then when we see heretics trying to foist decentralization and then changes made through decentralization, as we'll talk about here in a few minutes, onto the faith, then we are just insulting the martyrs and mocking the price they paid for them. So here's what he had to say. Quote, Strickland began his address October 31st by reading a letter sent to him by a Catholic layman prior to the bishop's trip to the Eternal City for the Rome Life Forum, a conference founded by LifeSite News editor-in-chief John Henry Weston. In the letter, which Strickland said he thought was intended not only for him but also for those present, the prelate admonished, you cannot indeed. You must not go to Rome and play nicely. The Queen of Martyrs has called you, and you cannot parcel out the truth in pieces. The Synod has gathered cowards in Rome, those who not only refuse to give everything for our Lord and his church, but indeed demand that his eternal truths be changed, the letter continued. And if you play nicely with these, then you mock the martyrs. End quote. Where's the lie? Where is the lie? Remember, the Synod's purpose was not to give us deaconettes. The Synod's purpose was not to give us the James Martin sin made suddenly okay. The purpose of the Synod, and they said this several times, was to decentralize things and make the laity have a much greater say in the life of the church, and to essentially enable the laity and the bishops to impose all these other kinds of radical changes on the church by doing so at the local level. That's what the point of this was. And here he's reminding us we have to resist all of this stuff. People checking in from all over the world. This is why I do these earlier morning live streams, by the way, is because it's later in the day for a lot of people, prime time in, the Eastern Hemisphere. Mary Woolley, member of the channel, says, brief good morning, off to mass shortly, so we'll remember you there. We'll catch your broadcast later. God bless all. And God bless you, Mary Woolley. Keep us in your prayers, please. He does go on to remind us that it was the martyrs who gave everything that made Christendom possible. It wasn't the whining of the cowardly. It wasn't big words from people who just talk. It was their sacrifice that made everything possible. That it's our duty to call out heresy. And if we don't do that and don't call out heresy for what it is, then it's the mark of cowardice that mocks the sacrifice the early Christians made for all of us. We should remember the early Christians and everything they gave, especially in these times when where the norm of the day is pinching a bunch of incense for Caesar. That's the problem we have now. That is essentially what we're seeing to the values of the world, to a lot of their big claims about things going on in the world. The church has found itself knee deep in all of those things for the last 60 years or so. That is a problem. And it's long past time for people to say no more. So Strickland, he goes on to say this, quote, "It's easy to assert that no real damage has been done to the church by the synod, but it has done untold damage in attempting to cheapen what Christ has said was worth his life, and for which he indeed shed his precious blood. Playing nicely with those who attack the truth makes no man a disciple." Strickland himself went on to say that he would not be silent in the face of blatant attacks on the faith. He would continue to speak out in defense of Catholic teaching. "The prevailing imprudence in our church today is not speaking out inappropriately. I'd rather do that than not speak out when it's necessary, absolutely necessary," he declared, to which those listening responded with loud applause. End quote. I'd happily give you the footage of this, but of course this is going to be behind LifeSite's paywall, and that's totally their prerogative, and I'll respect it. But it's worth remembering that what he says here is absolutely true, that we have to actually continue to speak out about it. And it's not imprudence. The prevailing imprudence isn't the people speaking maybe a little too harshly about the things going on in Rome. It's the opposite. It's people being too nice about it. The Pope-splaining that we sometimes call it, this weird, bizarre exercise of people, this sort of obsession that people have of trying to explain everything away as orthodox when clearly it's not. Any honest actor will tell you that what we see is not orthodox. This hyperpapalism is dangerous to the faith, and it has to be resisted. Now, he did say also one other thing here, and I'm going to turn to Info Vaticana, a European Spanish language news site, for this one. Headline: Bishop Strickland confesses that the first time he celebrated the traditional Mass, he was moved to the point of shedding tears. He is becoming more and more an advocate of the traditional liturgy, and more power to him. We need more bishops who do that, especially if he manages to weather the storm of the apostolic visitation and keep his post. Then it'd be nice to have a diocese in as big and important a state as Texas, in the American heartland, that is friendly to the traditional liturgy and maybe will resist Traditionis Custodes. Here's what they had to say, quote, "Speaking of the beauty of the glorious Latin Mass," in quotations, his words, "which the bishop noted has been attacked by the Vatican, Strickland said he was moved to the point of tears the first time he celebrated the traditional Latin Mass." End quote. Again, I'm not terribly surprised by that. I've heard that many times from other bishops. Sometimes I would be present when they would be speaking about this, or you'll see these interviews online with other bishops who dipped their toe into sacred tradition and learned the same Mass that goes back through organic development to, some liturgists argue, the time of the apostles. I'm not surprised he had that reaction to it. Christy Chesty Marie says, Michael Matt is a pretty good video with final thoughts on the synod. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. Weirdly, I'm not getting recommended as much Catholic content as I used to on YouTube. It started happening in the last few days, and I've seen it happening to my channel too. So this is why I suggest people go to returntotradition.org and Just sign up for notifications. I do a post. It'll let you know when I do my sources post every day, so that if you're not let know of a video, you'll get an email from WordPress that will tell you, hey, this is, here's the video, here's the audio, and here's all my sources for it. It's great. It works. And, I've got a few hundred people who do that. Let me know if anybody would be interested in a newsletter. By the way, I've been suggested that by somebody recently. I want to also give you a piece of good news that's not related to Bishop Strickland. This, I get people say I don't ever talk about good news. Well, I think the Strickland piece is good news. I think a motivating speech from one of the more suddenly important bishops in the church is actually good news by itself. But I got another piece of good news here. Take this one with some caution, please. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But this comes from Info Vaticana also. Headline: Cardinal Marchetto confesses that Pope Francis will not change the doctrine on priestly celibacy. So Cardinal Marchetto, he's a Vatican veteran, if there ever was one. He worked in the diplomatic corps from 1968 until 1999, and he's still in the Roman Curia. He's been there for a very long time. He's a lifer in the Roman Curia. Now, his words here are good news, but again, I will remind you after you hear from him of why we should be cautious and take this into the proper context, which includes a little bit of a grain of salt or two. Quote: regarding priestly celibacy, Agostino Marchetto narrates how he has contributed with his works to making a great effort to, quote, defend celibacy rather than impose it. As a historian of the continuity and not of the rupture, or rather of a lifestyle and ecclesial conjugal love behind a disciplinary obligation of the church, I will not be asked, I believe, to support those who ask for its elimination in the Latin church. Furthermore, I feel supported by what Pope Francis said about it, that he will not do it, Marchetto says. End quote. So he's argued for his whole career in defense of the discipline, a discipline that goes back more than 1,000 years and is rooted firmly in the apostolic era. And in fact, it's such a long-standing tradition that to call it merely a discipline at this point and that it can be done away with is actually misleading. A practice in the church that goes back 200 years is considered part of sacred tradition. It's part of the big T tradition. This is not so simply a issue of motu proprio, it's gone kind of issue. This is something more fundamental. And it's one of the reasons why you see so many proponents of maintaining the discipline argue so fervently for it, is just it's part of sacred tradition by itself because of how long the practice has been going on in the church. That having been said, let's be a little bit cautious here. The whole point of the synod, as I said just a few minutes ago, wasn't to give us deaconettes, and it wasn't to give us James Martin blessings. Francis did that before the synod even started. And the synod isn't over. Those issues aren't closed. Remember, the synod is starting back up again in October of next year, and they're going to focus on that issue. They said as much. The purpose of the Synod of Sin was to decentralize a lot of decision-making, including placing a lot of emphasis on the laity, on the feelings of the laity for what constitutes doctrine and dogma in the church, specifically doctrine more. But once you start messing with doctrine, dogma isn't far behind. And we saw some of that thinking with Francis's blessing of the sin in question when he made the issue, when he had Cardinal Fernandez say that this will be up to essentially the conscience of and the discernment of the local priest, not even the bishops. I mean, that's how far they want to take a lot of decentralization. That's on top of giving laity formal positions in the Roman Curia and speaking openly about the laity possibly essentially managing dioceses for bishops. The laity already in some places manage parishes, more common in Europe than America, but it does happen. And this goes beyond, having a pastoral administrator or something that is assist, like some layperson who assists the bishop in doing like the secretary work in an office, basically. Something more fundamental than that. That mechanism, if they successfully implement it, will be how they do it. I had somebody ask, what's the difference between ultramontanism and hyperpapalism? I mean, hyperpapalism is essentially a distortion of ultramontanism. Ultramontanists remind us that the Pope is a king, but he doesn't possess arbitrary power. Hyperpapalism is anything the Pope says goes because he's an oracle. He's beyond a monarch. He's something he's like a disordered, unnatural version of that. The Pope is essentially the prime minister for Christ on earth. his power is limited by the faith itself. That means things he says should be taken seriously, but he's not an arbitrary authoritarian. Not really. That's how people like to paint it. And no, the Pope is not chosen by the Holy Spirit. That is a 20th century idea. It's a really weird one, too, because to say that means that some of the really nasty popes in history were actively chosen by God, and God does not choose evil. So, Dean says the first time that he attended a Latin Mass, he was totally overwhelmed and never went back to the Novus Ordo. Many such cases. Good morning to Traveling Momio in Dubai. Good morning to you. Again, I'm considering a newsletter on my website. It's a good idea to just follow it there anyway. Because right now people are telling me they're not getting the notifications, and I'm seeing that in my numbers. It just happened like a switch was flipped a few days ago. Dean says in the dodge by the Skittles proponents is that married priests will lower the likelihood of Ted McCarrick stuff, which is nonsense. You're right, it is nonsense because anybody who knows the statistics of the problem that I'm skirting around here will tell you that stuff happens much like in the home. That's so, and when we know about the other places, we all talk about it in defense of priests all the time, but that happens in the home more than anything else. It's funny that you say that the Pope seems intent on diminishing his power. It seems like that. It does, and using a lot of power himself to do it. Again, he's here to, quote, reform the church. He was put on the throne of Peter by Cardinal Martini and others, and has admitted as much that he's running the program for the church that the people who helped him become Pope told him to run. He's said this to the media before. Ken McRae says the Pope is not above sacred tradition. You are correct. That applies to everybody on earth. None of us are. Does anybody have any further questions? Again, I like to keep these live streams fairly short. So if you have questions, super chats, this is the time to get them in. I will remind any channel member watching, you get a free super chat, I think like once a month. So that's a YouTube feature. Any channel you are a member of, use that feature when watching a live stream. Please do so. If you're a channel member watching this and you don't get my notifications anymore, let me know. The next time I have a meeting with my inside contact at YouTube, I will ask them to look into that for me. If nothing else, I have a video going live in 2 hours that you should take a look at, because Cardinal Mueller is addressing the does a pope automatically lose his office or not if he's a heretic? And that's an interesting thing that he's wading into, because he's a moderate, and his answer might surprise you, again, because he is a moderate in the church today. Knight Errant says that married priests also wouldn't increase vocations coming from an Eastern Catholic. I have heard that from many Eastern Catholics, that they have similar vocations problems that the Latin West does have. Thank you for your kind words, Chesty Marine. I appreciate it. It is very much coffee time. I haven't had a sip of my coffee since I started, but it is definitely coffee time. But for any further questions, let's see. We'll check in here, I think, with Canon 212, which is my favorite news website. I have some stories coming for you here in the next few days about some rather interesting things going on in the church. Yesterday was a big working day for me. Keep Frank Walker of Canon 212 in your prayers. He's recovering from a stroke, I believe. By the way, you remember how I reported how the dome of St. Peter's is darkened, seemingly for the first time in its history, that it needs like cleaning or something, and that it's just sort of at the very least symbolically accurate for what's going on in Rome? Well, now the dome is leaking. It's actively leaking. It's fallen into disrepair. And that is somehow, sadly, it is an appropriate metaphor for everything we're witnessing in the church today. Double fist the mug. I mean, I'm not even sure how much this holds. I've never measured it, but I think it holds about 16 ounces of coffee. And yes, also, that reminds me, this is the first Saturday. If you've been meaning to start your first Saturday, the 5 First Saturdays devotion, today is a great time to start it. Just find a mass that I highly recommend it not be like a Saturday vigil, like an ordinary Saturday vigil. This obligation should be in addition to going to mass tomorrow. It should also be a mass that is offered by the priest for the 5 First Saturdays devotion itself, for the reparation. You can find them. They're usually traditional Latin masses, but they're not always. This is a great time to start. If you start it now, November, December, January, February. You'd be finished in March. You'd be finished in time for Easter, actually, because I believe Easter is at the end of March this year, or the very beginning of April. But yeah, so the Dome of St. Peter's is not looking good. It's now leaking, and a couple days ago, this was reported by Glory TV, and they say the following with this headline: "Rain, Francis Vatican is literally falling apart." I've had some of my critics say that I just read Gloria TV articles. I actually go there sometimes to look for news stories, but anybody who regularly watches me knows I don't actually use Gloria TV that much. I don't have anything against them. They're very upfront with their bias, which I appreciate. But this article is like shorter than the quotes I often read. So here it is. Quote, "It is raining inside St. Peter's in the archives and other Vatican buildings," writes Aldo Maria Valli at his website. "Witnesses say that even the cleaning inside the Vatican has been insufficient. After Francis's prohibition to celebrate Mass in St. Peter's and the absence of his own ceremonies, the Vatican Basilica looks like a museum in a progressive state of neglect. Things are no better in the summer residence in Castel Gandolfo that is no longer used, which was turned into a museum and is beginning to suffer from the problems typical of such places, including a recent fire." Remember that fire story I reported to you about Benedict's former residence? That's what we're talking about here. So what is being damaged? The actual building, the actual structure. It's leaking. And they need to fix that, because we're talking about a priceless structure in the church. You can't put a monetary value on St. Peter's Basilica. It's the actual building. And if it's leaking, that means some of the artwork inside is now at risk. And they're spending a lot of time and energy trying to fix the thing. Yeah, the archives. That's also a problem. It's a lot of priceless information in the archives. And I'm not one who, believes all the speculation about what goes on in the Vatican archives. There's going to be a lot of interesting things in there, maybe brought to light someday. But a lot of people say a bunch of hooey about that. The cracks from the smoke of Satan which has entered? Perhaps, although more material cause would be the collapse in donations made by the laity, especially in the rich countries. A lot of laity are really fed up with things going on in the church and don't donate nearly as much to the tithing as we used to. We find other ways to tithe, and I've been reporting that for years, that financially the donation amounts have gone down, because there's of course there's that papal special collection in the summer that has collapsed in the U.S. There's also the fact that the money you donate to your parish gets taxed by the diocese. They take a cut. I don't know what the percentage is, and I think it varies depending on the diocese, but they take a cut. And as I understand it, the Vatican takes a cut from the actual dioceses as well, a small percentage from there. And so when you writ large, it becomes a pretty big deal, especially when you consider the fact that, there's a noted difference when you're collecting millions of euros and millions of dollars versus, or billions, in this case would be in the United States, versus similar numerical amounts in, say, Central Africa, right? The tax is it's just noticeably different. And when that amount goes down, their budgets are less. Yes, there's, they have other ways of getting money besides that, including, the tourist revenue. When you go pay to go on a tour of the Vatican, or you buy goods at the Vatican gift shops, the Vatican clearly is getting a cut from that. But the tourism is down too. I mean, how many times have we seen pictures floating around the internet of Francis giving an address to a mostly empty St. Peter's Basilica or St. Peter's Square? We've seen that many times. They're hurting financially. It's a consequence of the things they're doing. The laity, they may not know why they're against things going on, but this is how they resist. It's just to stop giving money. It's a dangerous thing, because we are required by the church to tithe and actually support the mission of the bishop and the mission of the church. So you got to figure out how to do that while not actually supporting the evil going on there. And one of my recommended ways is give to very specific bishops things for the bishop, if your bishop is one of the better ones, or support a seminarian. Pay for specific things, like donate to your building fund at your parish, because as I understand it, that doesn't get taxed by the diocese. So that money will stay in the diocese or stay in your parish. How would I interpret the dove event? When Bergoglio released a dove from St. Peter's Basilica and was attacked by a crow. I remember that. I think that was I'm not one who looks for signs in everything. I think it's a bad idea to look for signs in everything, but this is one of those things that's kind of hard to miss. I think that might actually have been a sign that we were dealing with not somebody who appeared to do what who we're dealing with someone who isn't what they appear to be. That's what we're dealing with. And that for all the peace talk and everything else, there's something more sinister beneath. Anyway, I think we'll wrap that up there. So I'm curious if you have anything else. Make sure to tune in later for my Cardinal Mueller talk. I think you will find that edifying. Cardinal Mueller is, if you have any thoughts on the Benedict XVI question, if you have thoughts about what happens when a pope falls into heresy, Cardinal Mueller is going to give you his thoughts on it, and coming from a moderate, that's fascinating. Anyway, thanks for tuning in today, folks. That video that I just spoke about will be up in about an hour and a half. So God bless.